today is from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make humanity in our image to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and all the crawling things on the earth." God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them. Well, 2020 has been one of the most chaotic years in recent history, filled with monsters, environmental, social, and political. Last week, we began our discussion about chaos, monsters, and gods by examining what our monsters reveal about ourselves and our society. We looked at monsters as social commentary and discussed what the monsters currently in our midst reveal about ourselves and our society. Today, we continue our discussion by beginning at the beginning with the OG, the original gods. We'll examine how our creation legends affect and reflect our sense of self-worth, considering the role our sense of self plays in society's organization. Our view of creation and creator shapes much of who we are and the way we act. The oldest existing creation story is the Enuma Elish. We have fragments from as early as 1200 BCE, actually, but those fragments themselves indicate that the story was circulating as far back as 1750 BCE. Now, this is probably Sumerian in origin, but the version that we're going to use today is Babylonian, merely because of the preponderance and availability of this version of the story. The Enuma Elish begins with a universe of chaotically swirling water. Eventually, this unformed, chaotic, swirling quantum foam divides like a cell into two beings, Apsu and Tiamat. Both creatures are imagined as water dragons, freshwater Apsu and saltwater Tiamat. These two primordial bodies of water merge and create the first gods, Lamu and Lahamu. These two gods begin to form the universe by having children of their own who take control of the land, the seas, the heavens, until ultimately many gods are ruling the cosmos. Well, eventually the noise that all of these gods are making doing their work becomes too much for Apsu, who's finally driven to his limit by all the cacophony and commotion caused by the kids. So Apsu decides to destroy the other gods, even though they're his children. Well, Tiamat naturally is horrified by this plan and opposes Apsu. She anoints a champion, Kingu, who keeps Apsu at bay but cannot defeat him. Eventually, Apsu is conquered by his great-grandson, the god Ea, who happens to be the god of wisdom. Ea uses a spell to subdue Apsu and keep him imprisoned in a death-like state of sleep. In some later versions of the story, Ea uses a spell to subdue Apsu and then decapitate him. All seems well, and Ea and his wife have a son, the god Marduk, who, as a child, is the favorite of the other gods. They give Marduk the winds as a toy to play with, but the winds stir up trouble on the salty seas, enraging Tiamat. Tiamat, her new husband, the god Kingu, the one who fought for her in battle, remember, and a group of gods to which she has given birth, with Kingu, swear revenge for this and Ea's treatment of Apsu. Well, the gods are frightened at the prospect of facing Tiamat's army with Kingu at its head. They don't know how they could possibly defeat it. So Marduk speaks up, offering to fight for the gods and defeat Tiamat and Kingu on one condition: that he be made absolute king of the gods, having even the power of life and death over his fellow divinities. Well, of course, before giving Marduk this kind of power, the rest of the gods decide to test him by setting up a new constellation in the heavens. They challenge Marduk first to destroy the constellation and then to restore it just as it was. Well, Marduk passes this test, and the gods agree to his conditions. Marduk is armed with a mace, a bow and arrows, and a net, and he's sent off to do battle. Marduk faces the dragon Tiamat in single combat. He catches her in his net and dispatches her with an arrow. Marduk then cuts up Tiamat's body and uses it to construct the dome of the sky, as well as various natural phenomena. Marduk then buries her head under a mountain and pierces her eyes, which become the source for the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In this way, Marduk demonstrates his absolute mastery over the natural world. Marduk pardons all of the gods who fought with Tiamat, except for Kingu, of course, but demands that as penance, they construct for him a royal city, Babylon, and a temple in it from which to rule. Marduk also convenes a council of the gods at which Kingu is tried and executed. To free the gods from any further toil or manual labor, Marduk, after consulting with Ea, the god of wisdom, commands that the gods use Kingu's corpse to construct the first humans. Humans who are designed to do all the manual labor for the gods. Now, these new beings, humans, are created solely to serve the gods. Although I must say, part of our service is helping the gods maintain order and keep chaos at bay. Still, humans are viewed very much as slaves to the whims of the gods. And keep this in mind when we talk about Genesis in just a moment. Marduk's commands are obeyed. The gods build the city of Babylon, the temple for Marduk, and then they create humanity as servants. The epic ends with a feast at Marduk's temple, at which the rest of the gods formally proclaim him their king. Chaos gods like Tiamat and Marduk represent the wild and often unstable nature of human civilizations, especially early empires like Sumeria, continually invaded by foreigners, creating chaos out of their society's order and balance. For those early theologians, ideas about our relationship to the divine were very much a reflection of the world in which they lived. Often, our theological reflections are an answer to the world's ills. The Enuma Elish massively influenced the Hebrew authors of Genesis, who adapted the Babylonian cultural cues to help form their own people's historical and cultural identity. The Hebrews also made some critical and lasting theological innovations. Notably, while in the beginning the Babylonians imagined a pre-existent chaotic body of water, the Hebrews instead conceived that in the beginning there was nothing. The ancient Hebrews found a flaw in the Babylonian line of reasoning that many of us struggle with even today when we talk about creation. Can anything pre-exist? The problem the Hebrews had was that if the gods came from this body of water, what made the body of water? And then what made that body of water? And so on and so on and so on. The Jewish authors of Genesis realized that when we can finally stop asking what made this, we find God, who bursts into life from nothingness. The Jews adapting the Enuma Elish rethought of God as creating order not out of chaos, but ex nihilo, out of nothing. It is in the nothingness that God creates. And since there is nothing else, God must make from God's self, which then self-replicates and begins to self-order into the universe and reality and plants and animals and minerals that we all know. This is a great and powerful God indeed, and a tremendous theological innovation. A God who creates out of nothing, an explosion of conscious self-realization on a cosmic level. In the pre-existent darkness, God booms, "I am." And then there is light. And then there is everything. Genesis eerily predicts our current scientific understanding of creation. Even though I've thought about these origin stories for years, the realization of what our ancient Jewish forebears intuited still amazes and inspires me. It's it's one thing to have, space telescopes and scanning tunneling microscopes and particle accelerators and all of these tools that allow us to peer into the infinitesimally small engines of creation. But our ancient Jewish philosophers had only a campfire, the vast star-filled night sky, and their imaginations. And still, they came pretty darn close to figuring it out how it all works. More importantly, they completely rethought the way humans and God are in relationship by seeing us not as slaves, but as imagers of God. From the time it took to get from Sumeria to Jerusalem, humans evolved from divine slaves to divine co-creators. Every individual, an important part of God's work in this reality. It's that sort of inspiration, innovation, and frankly, confidence in God's compassionate, progressive, inviting presence that we must reclaim if we're to continue our ancestors' phenomenal work, if we're to make a difference. We humans were once people who dreamed amazing things, of watery beasts fighting at and over creation, of chaos, monsters, and men. We dreamed of an eternity of love and imagined we were created to take part in and co-create it. I believe that for many decades now, we have been asleep, but not dreaming, zombie walking through life, busily not paying any attention while we destroy relationships, politics, social welfare, and the planet. But God is forcefully calling us to wake up and remember, we are created to think and work not destructively, but creatively. Now is the time to open not only our eyes, but also our perception. When we perceive, we see the DNA of the Big Bang, the explosion of God's consciousness in everything and everyone. That awareness inspires dreamers like you and I who work tirelessly to unite, heal, educate, serve, and inspire all over the world, and as godlike a way as possible, one voice at a time. Because when one voice is brave enough to sing out to God, others most assuredly follow. Amen. My question for you today is, what is your co-creative dream? What is your co-creative dream? I'll send you into a few breakout